whatsoever. Father, we come and we thank you for really the reminder of being a steward, and that by definition, stewards or managers will give an account one day for all that we have and all that we do, and knowing that, again, you as our Creator and as our Savior, first and foremost, we're going to answer. And that's good. It helps to keep us on track. It's a reminder, too, brings us humility. Help us to see the ways in which we could do better, as always, in growing in our relationship with you. We just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So any thoughts on being a steward? Did it change your life? Did it make you think differently? Anybody?
Yeah. I mean, I like being reminded of it because I do tend to forget that every single thing that I have, my life included, belongs to the Lord.
Yeah.
And so I need to be a good steward.
I'll never say mine again.
That's good. That's good.
It's paid off. I had dinner with a friend last night who was in a motorcycle accident and almost lost his life. He has a lot of pain now, but he said, I was like, how are things? He's like, you know what? I have breath in my lungs. It is a good day.
Wow.
And
Perspective.
it is just reminds me of that stewardship thing. Everything is a gift. We are not guaranteed, breath in our lungs. So even with all of his pain, and he walks with a cane now and all that stuff, he's just like, it's a great day.
He's alive. He's alive.
I keep going back to my father is the owner of 1,000 Hills kind of thing, and so I just thank him for all of the things that he's provided for me, and so that I can help others, so on and so forth.
So much is given, much is required. So
Yeah.
if he blesses you much, you have to give more.
Yeah.
It's required.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah.
And so,
And it's like, like Pastor said, it's not always the monetary things, but if
Yeah.
you got it, you can.
You see the consistency of, even James 3, let there be few teachers. Why? They're going to receive the stricter judgment. Well, why would they receive the stricter judgment?
Because they're in charge of people and making sure that they know what's the truth.
Right, that you don't cause somebody else to stumble.
There's a variety of things. I mean, the teacher, you would hope that if they're gifted, that, they, even though they might study on their own or whatever, God still gives them the ability to learn and to understand and to have knowledge and to share that as one of God's, positions in the church or whatever. But secondly, they're constantly talking. I was thinking about that. Man, I usually be careful to talk because I talk too much. Because the more you talk, right, we said last time, we're going to give an account for every word, even every idle word. How much more so for those that, being up in front, saying this is the truth, and then God saying, you talked a lot about truth, and yet, you're required to live, you have a greater standard of living up to that, which It's one thing, there's a certain sense that God grants grace to the ignorant. We see that in Acts 17. In the times of ignorance, it says he is overlooked to some degree, but now commands everyone everywhere to repent. But
God protects drunks and fools.
well, yes, but when you come up and, Paul says this in Romans 2, he says, you who teach the law are the ones that break it, so now you have no excuse because you can't say, well, I didn't know, because you're up there teaching it. And so again, the more we teach and the more we know. I think about, I was talking to Taylor this last week, and we were just talking about life, and I said, if this wasn't true, I probably would do a lot of different things, as a Christian. I would, when I was a young kid, I used to play video games a lot, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, and but I haven't done that in probably like 20 years, mainly because of being a Christian. Now, that doesn't mean if you're playing video games as a Christian, but for me, I always felt like, gosh, wasting a lot of time, and it's been, I guess in some ways it's entertainment, and a lot of people, I kind of take that stewardship to bring it around in a variety of ways, is how much time am I spending on entertainment? You know, that could be anything. You know, if I sit and watch movies for 8 hours in a day, there's no really no difference than if I was to play video games or whatever. But how much am I entertaining myself? And we'll see that today in the letter, is how much are we just simply entertaining ourselves, amusing ourselves is the word that he uses. And there needs to be a balance on that regard. And
Plus the content
meaning?
of most of these video games is not real good.
Yeah, I never got into any of the slasher, you know, the blood all over. I really wasn't interested in that. It was more of the puzzles and the role-playing and the adventure, different things. But nevertheless, I had a buddy of mine, he would always tell me, well, you know, I would talk to him and challenge him on his giving, you know, his financial giving. Well, I just don't have it. I don't have it. I'm just, I'm broke. And I would say, well, it's interesting that you certainly make it a priority to spend at least 3 or 4 hours at the casino every week. You know, how are you, how are you justifying that? Well, or again, I said, look, let's look at your entertainment budget. And is your entertainment budget as a steward, what does your entertainment budget look like versus your giving budget? I said, don't you think you could, bring that down or balance it out or whatever? And it's all individual. It's personal to each one. But nevertheless, he had a priority to be at the casino, but yet he didn't have any money for the Lord's kingdom. It's really, again, there's a disparity there.
I like that the Lord leaves it loose, because then it makes us be in relationship with Him over it.
Yep.
Instead of just like another box we can check, He makes us actually examine and listen to Him, and I like that,
Yeah.
because then it's more like, okay, all right, I gotta, like, this is gonna be relational between you
Yeah.
and I, because this does belong to you, and I can't just say, oh, this is what you've commanded, so this is what I'll do.
Yeah. That's interesting too, is that when you get into that discussion, in the Old Testament, there was 3 tithes, so it's 23 1/3, and then and there was offerings besides. But when you come into the New Testament doesn't give an amount, and so what it does is it leaves it to the individual. And so I remember I had this one gal one time. She said, well, I want to know how much, she was a very studious person, so this is to her credit, but she said, I want to know how much I'm supposed to give. And I said, well, again, in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 16, it says it's God has purposed in your heart. It does, in 2 Corinthians 9, it talks about giving. Do you want to, it does kind of pull out how much do you want to be blessed. Do you want to be a 1% blessed, or do you want to be 5% blessed, or 10%, or 20%? So she said, can't you just tell me? I just want to check it off. But in her heart, she wanted to be obedient. And so again, I give her credit, but yet God said, no, I'm not going to just give you this amount. It's going to be, this week I might want you to do more than, because she wanted to just check off the 10% amount. And, they did really well. And I think
it's also about being a cheerful giver.
Well, yeah, and I'm not want to indict her, because she was a task person. And so, for some people, I think, again, we look at the widow, she gave 100% in Luke 19, and for some people, 10% is way too low, because they can do so much more. It depends. And that, again, so that's not for me to decide, but you just look in general, but that's for them and the Lord. But, so getting back to what we're doing here, is all of those things we're stewards. We're going to give an answer. And we're going to come one day and God's going to say, hey, I gave you this much time. I gave you this much resources. I gave you these gifts. I gave you this much abilities for even length of life. And how, it's the same thing. I gave you this. What do you have now in return? Because we see that in all parables in the New Testament. Jesus, they come and they answer, and he says, okay, there's going to be accounting. I gave you this. What did you do with it? I was away for a while, and we know that the one that said, well, I knew you were harsh, so I just buried it. And then here you can have it back. Here's your dollar back or whatever. And he says, you wicked and lazy servant. Man, you should at least given it to the bank, because I could have got some interest on it.
You see, I never understood that third person who, just because he was harsh, buried it. I don't understand his logic or his reasoning.
What do you guys think? What's the, that kind of gets in.
What if he lost it?
Pardon?
What if he invested poorly with it
Well,
and
that's
lost some of
true.
it?
So there's fear. He felt that the risk, he was unwilling to risk.
Right.
Really what the Lord had told him to go and be
Well, I kind of
risky in some sense.
I understand that, but still, I don't understand why he felt that way. If it was, well, I don't know. It was,
Everybody's
Doesn't
psyche
make-
is different.
yes, that's
It's true. Because the even, you know, Jesus in the image, the master said to him, you know, if you by your own words, you acknowledge that I'm a harsh, or that I have expectations. So
Right.
you've acknowledged that, and yet you still didn't do it. So we got to be careful how much we say that we believe about God. But I think all of us in here recognize that God is the master and we're stewards, and therefore, just by admitting that, we're in big trouble, potentially, if we don't, if we don't
Well, I think it just,
be faithful.
just what I just said, because he gave more, much was more required, and much more we were rewarded. So I meant
Yeah.
the more you have, the more you're required to give,
Yeah.
and the more and more. And I think the widow's mite example is we're going to be judged on what we have left.
I think so too. You know, we're not judged on what we give, we're judged on what we have left. Because that shows true generosity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, versus again, when you think of somebody who's a billionaire and they give $1 million, you think, oh wow, that's great. Wow, that's a lot of money, but that's 1%. You know, so what does that have to do with really, in the sense of being generous when they're living on the rest of it?
And doesn't it also go out to how you are with other people? You know, not just your giving, say, your tithe to the church.
Yeah.
But to the other people that are around you that you minister to
Right.
and
Yeah, it's
bring
not
into
just
your
money.
home and let them stay for a year or whatever.
So he said
you know?
stewardship is about, you know, again, all those things.
Yeah.
Your time, talents, and treasures, if you want to
Yeah.
say it, 3 T's, you know, in that sense. So let's jump in. We got through paragraph 2, and we talked about how feelings are running through this particular paragraph. And the feelings lead to the emotion of being angry that something was taken away from him. And so we'll do the last sentence of paragraph 2 as a segue. He says, but what he must never be permitted to doubt is that the total from which these deductions have been made was in some mysterious sense his own personal birthright. Okay? That kind of leads us in. I have his own personal birthright. So any sort of demands on his time or people showing up, he's deducting them and saying, well, all right, fine. I'll deduct these and give them to the Lord or give them to this person. But I should be credited because this was mine to give. Which, okay. He says, paragraph 3, you have here a delicate task. The assumption which you want him to go on making is so absurd that if once it is questioned, even we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes to him by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon his chattels. What's that mean?
Well, that they belong to him
Right.
to use what.
So, I like this. You know, he's being dramatic, of course. C.S. Lewis has his ways. But if we think our time is our own, then we might as well regard the sun and moon as our own personal property. Why is that? How is that logically connected?
Well, everything's ours. We think everything is ours.
Okay.
So we're just expanded, you know, hey, if I say these are mine, then everything's mine. You know, I can say,
How so?
I can attach it to anything because I take possession of it. It exists.
Okay.
I'm not giving any credit to a creator or anybody.
Okay.
That.
There you're heading there. I think that's. He makes the comment about. Okay, we'll keep going. What else? What else? Anybody else? You mentioned the right word.
Create.
I just think my time is his time. When I dedicate my day to him, my time is used the way he wants it used, and more gets done for him. And for me, actually, I benefit from it.
He created it for me.
What is time? It's just like a.
Well, what he's saying is that the same one that created time is the same one that created the sun and the moon. So by ownership, we recognize that did we create the sun? Well, no. Did we create the moon? No. So we don't have any ownership of those. Did we create time? No. Or even our own?
We can create it.
No. So if we claim time, then we might as well claim the sun and the moon and the rest of the universe. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
You get it? You see what
Because
he's
it's all
saying?
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's all ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's absurd because, so he's trying to show the absurdity that none of us would claim to own the sun and the moon. We'd be humble enough to say, well, no, I wasn't really there on that. And so he's going to say, well, if that's true, if you really believe that, then why are you claiming time as your own?
My time.
You can't
Yeah,
possess it.
there is no such thing, yeah. And so he says, it's all comes to him by a pure what? Gift. He is also, in theory, okay, committed a total service of the enemy. And if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, he would not refuse. He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman, or doesn't matter as being a woman. And he said, and he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if for 1/2 hour in that day the enemy said, now you may go and amuse yourself. Now, if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. So, before we go too quick on that, let's see here. Question 3. In paragraphs 2 and 3, the word assumption appears 4 times, or 5, it's 5, but it's 4. What is the assumption made by the patient, and share how you have experienced this? So remember, in the second paragraph, he's getting angry because he had his day planned out, and then somebody comes in and interrupts it. You know, it could be a talkative wife, it could be he was going to go out with a friend, and that got interrupted by the unexpected visitor. What's the assumption? Kind of already said it, but
Well, the time is his own.
time is his own,
He can
right?
do with it what he wants.
Now is that an assumption?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
We're just assuming that. Now, why do we assume that? How do we get here? Let's just, in
We
reality.
kind of know how long the average lifespan is, and we think that's what we're going to be living.
Well, on a daily basis.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Pardon?
It's like we're selfish.
Okay. So I think selfishness certainly can play into it, but I think it comes just by habit. We get up every day, we have a certain amount of time, and we live every day as if our day is our own. You know,
Yeah.
and so, work is one thing. You know, when you go to work, you say, okay, for the next 8 hours or whatever, this work, I'm slave to the owner, right, so to speak.
But lunchtime is yours.
Lunchtime is mine. If you get a lunch. So. And so, but imagine like a slave, a real slave. Do they have any time?
Mm-hmm. Nope.
They get up every day and they go, whatever you want. What's my instructions today? And so, a true understanding of that, because we're free, because we're Americans and we live in relative freedom, we tend to take ownership of a lot of things that really aren't, they're absurd, but we do it by habit.
We tend to put God in a box, I think.
Okay.
We separate him from what we are doing. You know, we say hello to him in the morning, which is what I do when I put my feet on the floor. Good morning, God. But then, and I do my devotionals.
Okay.
But then, the rest of the time, that's when I turn on Good Morning America and have my breakfast and do my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I put him in a box, kind of. I never thought about that, but I've separated him from my day, kind
That's
of.
what I'm saying about when I dedicate my day to him.
Mhm.
it goes so much better because he takes over.
Yeah.
Or when I don't, and I have my to-do list.
Well, and I think, again, here we are, we get in some of these habits where the habits are good, prayer is good, and we come and we say, okay, Lord, I'm dedicating this day, and then, we have a task and we feel certain things that we're doing, and then a few hours in, we get a phone call. And a lot of times, I'll look and I'll be like, gosh, do I have time for this? Because it might be, we have people, you answer that phone,
Yeah.
that's an hour, right?
Yeah.
And you think, it's been a while. I know they're struggling.
I guess I better.
I guess I better. and it's not so much that it's unloving, it's going to interrupt what I had planned. My schedule. And so, you go and you go, all right. And so it's interesting that sometimes, we'll even dedicate the day to the Lord, but then when that moment comes, we forget.
Completely.
And we go, and God say, I thought you dedicated the day to me.
But when you remember it, they bless you in that phone conversation.
It is, yeah.
It
could be, you name it. It could be a whole different variety of situations. It could be somebody at work. It could be relationships, family, anything that interrupts you. And so, let's see here.
I have one more
Go
thing to
ahead.
say on that. When it says, if you were actually to show up in person, we would be thankful for any shred of time that we get. He's like, oh, go in and amuse yourself.
Yeah.
And it just is really interesting looking at that, and I think we mistake his willingness and to give us choices as ownership, and so his liberty, we misinterpret that as saying, oh, then this is mine now, but he's actually giving us a construct with which to operate within, and then we get complacent. And I observe this in prisons, the power differential goes, you gotta balance it really carefully between the institution and the inmates.
Okay.
Or it will swing one way, and then the institution has to lock down and remind them what you are in prison, you are not free, you do not have these liberties.
No rights.
Or if they lock down so hard all the time, then it puts a rebellion into place because it's unjust and it's unkind, right? And so there's this pendulum.
Hypothetically, right?
Well, there are horrible things that happen
Okay.
in prison to inmates. And so it swings back and forth, and it's that balance of the inmates remembering where they're at, so that they're not touching staff or disobeying the rules or doing anything that they're not allowed to do. But if the institution allows them to do that, they will take those liberties because they forget where they're at. And I think that that's exactly like us. We take our day, we go, God has given us a lot of liberties, so we just forget that he's done that to say, hey, but I still have these parameters by which you need to operate within. And then we take them because it's our sinful nature.
That's a really good illustration in a sense because of when you think about. That's why I say hypothetically because not that bad things don't happen. More in the line I was thinking is that, let's say that again you get these freedoms or you get these interactions that maybe you have a person that's there for 15 years and he's interacting with a guard or something. And ultimately, what the guard has to say is, look. In some ways, look, I'm not your friend. Okay, I still have this position. You're still in prison, and in here you have no rights, really. I mean, we've been giving you freedom, but you haven't earned those. You can't demand those, and so there has to be sometimes this redemonstration of what really is the case. And I think it's sad because part of I would imagine being a prisoner, you'd go, oh well, I thought we were friends, and then I imagine you would. And there's probably a sense that the guard is probably in a tough situation because he would say, well, I want to be, but I can never not be who this person is over here. So if that friendship is causing you to take advantage or to assume, which is really what we have here, right?
Assumption.
This assumption, that these other parameters of the relationship have been erased or minimized, God is never less than God to us. He's never less than the Creator. He's never less than the Master. Now, if He wants to come and give us some freedom, then, as I said, we own it, and then it blurs the line.
Doesn't He give us choices to be blessed? So
Say again?
He gives us choices to be blessed. In other words, we go on a missions trip, or give water to the food for the hungry, or everything we give, we will be blessed by God because He sees us doing our, things that represent Him and glorify Him. So if we choose how much we want to be blessed by the decisions we make. Yeah,
okay, I see what you're saying. I think there's it reminds me of, again, we can, we'll get there, But, so, let's go with the image for a moment, because we got some time. God shows up, and He says, hey, He's reasserting the relationship. I bought you, correct? Yes, Lord. All? 100%? Yes. Why? How did I buy you? Well, you died for me, Lord. I deserved hell forever, and so you purchased me. So how much do you owe me? I owe you not 23 hours and 59 minutes. I owe you 24 hours in a day. He says, okay. That's mine, right? You agree. We all agree that I purchased you, and you are grateful that you're not going to be in hell, and therefore you owe me this. Yes. Okay. So then God says, all right, this is what we're going to do. I want you to go over here, and I want you to, shovel for 24 hours. And then tomorrow, I don't get any sleep? Nope. I want you to shovel for 24 hours. Like, okay. Okay. I guess that's what my task is. And so, we go and we work, and let's say we do it for one 24-hour period. God says, all right, well, I know you're tired, so I'm going to let you go sleep. You get 3 hours of sleep. Okay? Now, we would start going, that's pretty harsh. But He's right, because I owe Him this. So what happens is we remove what is rightfully His, what the example that He uses here, He says, He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman. He'd be like, and imagine God going up and saying, you know what? You owe me everything? Okay. He said, well, the next day He comes and says, well, yesterday I had you shoveling for 24 hours. Yeah, Lord. Today, 30 minutes, I want you to listen to this person talk. Yes! We'd be so happy, wouldn't we? Compared to, well, maybe we'd want to shovel off for 24 hours, I don't know. Okay? It depends on the person. Okay, but nevertheless, it's all about perspective. And He says here, and He would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if for 1/2 hour that day the enemy said, now, hey, you go amuse yourself. So, often what we happen in our minds today, we come in and with this entitlement mentality, especially you can see it in a lot of the younger generation going, well, okay, I'm going to get a job, and they're going, yeah, we're going to give you this job, and they go, well, my salary is going to be $70,000 a year, right? Well, I only make $70,000 a year. What makes you think you're going to get $70,000? Well, what do you mean? I had to work 25 years to get $70,000 and 4 weeks vacation or whatever. And they're going to go, well, I can't do this job, man. They have this mentality that they walk right in without earning it, that it's owed to them. And so here, He's describing it in such a way that, they come in and we go, okay, well, Lord, you want me to shovel? What about my lunch hour? What lunch hour? I don't owe you a lunch hour. I want you to work nonstop because that's what you owe me. And so it's a matter of perspective here that we would be so happy for that 30-minute lunch hour, that break, if we didn't get it the first day and we got it the second day. We're like, oh, wow. And really, But when we see the Lord comes in and says, hey, look, you're mine. Yes, Lord, I owe it all to you. He says, you know, I'll tell you what. I have 30 minutes of work for you today, and the rest I've given to you as a gift. Go do whatever makes you happy. That's really how the Lord is.
Well, that's why he has a day of worship, right? Because he gave us to worship one day a week.
Go on, explain.
I guess what I'm saying, a lot of people don't even give him one day a week. Right?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, there's a lot of perspective when in reality, every day is his, and that's Romans 14 describes that. This, some people just exalt.
Well, 6 days he worked and he rested on the seventh.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Mondo, every, I look at it, if God assigns me 24 hours of work and digging dishes or whatever it is, whatever it might be, the task, God gives you the will and the strength to do it. If it's 48 hours, it doesn't matter. Sleep's like practicing being dead anyway.
That's his old saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, reality.
There's
I
no
think
doubt.
Everybody does something beyond what they're capable when the glory's going to God and it's God driven.
Whenever you do, like go on a mission trip, well, I can't take that much time off. But when you come back,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
found out, yeah, you could.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt that God comes along and he, it's a different angle, but it's all in the same thing, that God equips those for the task of what he calls us to, for sure. The challenge here in this mind is to look at all of our days, we all have 168 hours in a week, and say, okay, all these are the Lord's, and I think often in our situation as stewards, God does say, hey, I own 168 hours, but I'm going to allow you the freedom to decide how much you're going to give very specific to me. Now, that's dangerous, isn't it? Why is that dangerous?
He gives you appointments.
He gives you a choice, and our choice might not be,
Okay.
it would be a selfish choice.
Right, because we're selfish.
Yeah.
That's really what we're after.
We would take as much as we want.
We tend to amuse ourselves much more. Can we say we amuse ourselves much more than we should? Well, it's all relative. I can't say what you should do with your time or whatever, but what God does say is, this is how gracious I am, is you owe it all to me anyway. But I'm going to let you choose of this freedom how much you want to return back to me and invest in what I'm doing and to partner with me. And not only that, but you owe it to me anyway, but I'm so gracious that the more you give back to me, I'm going to give you an additional blessing on it. And we go, really? He's going to say, yeah. That's how gracious he is. So that we get crowns. But in Revelation 4, what do we do with the crowns?
Put him at
Give
his
it
feet.
back.
We lay them at his feet, because apart from him, we can do nothing. Go ahead.
I'm kind of thinking about that he doesn't give us more than we can handle. And we just need to trust him and follow him. And I was just thinking, if we aren't following, then we're doing what we want to do
Yeah.
instead of what he wants us to do. So I just said one step behind, and whatever he gives us, we can do.
There are times when he certainly will show up and say, hey, I want you to do this, or, I'm invading your time. Which is really, even there I was guilty. It's not our time, right? I'm invading the time that I've allowed you to decide on your own. And yes, I'm going to demand some of it back for certain instances, for sure. And but ultimately, it's our selfishness and it's our idol of comfort and amusement and entertainment. And I think that's one of the biggest detriments to the church. If you compare the church, I'll say Christians would be better. If you compare the Christians today versus 300 years ago, which group was more biblically literate?
300 years
Yeah,
ago.
why?
That's all he had.
That's all they had, yeah.
What?
They didn't have the education of the masses of television. Yes.
Everything else.
I think it's
Internet.
television.
TV, internet, right? The accessibility to amuse ourselves, whatever it could be. Screens, whatever screens that come to be. And so, oftentimes, because you were bored, you would read, and you would read a lot of things. And, you know, when you'd be like, oh, do I want to go out and farm the ground, or should I read? Well, okay, you would read. Where today, you know, whatever, there's just a greater level of understanding.
Well,
Well,
there's-
what I gotta say is one of the biggest difference, in you know, in that time frame of 300 years, you talked to literature or no media, the reality was people went out and did it. Today we get so caught in the media, and even in Christian media study, we're filling up the cup, but we're not emptying it out anymore.
One of the things that I think in the whole world, a lot of people don't realize, like 75% of the people in the world are at like $6,000 a year.
They what?
Less than
Oh, yeah,
$6,000 a year.
Yeah.
So I meant, and that's why a mission trip is so opening, that you realize that so many people of the whole world are living in poverty, absolute poverty, and it's sad that here we're over here in our poverty levels, we're rich in their standards. We're like, I don't know what our poverty level is now, but I think it's like 18,000 or something like that.
And it's all relative, you know, to the culture. But you know, one of the best things, one of the curses, we were talking about this in our men's group this week, is that one of the curses of in the tribulations of, there's tribulation for the poor. Obviously, Proverbs 30 says, "Don't make me poor, because I might steal and blaspheme you, but don't make me rich either, because then I might forget you, because I don't need you." And so there's these temptations that go for the poor, and there's temptations in being rich, you know, and being wealthy. And you look and you say, well, what are some of the temptations that we discussed of being wealthy? Is one is you have so many choices. So now you're struggling with all the choices, where you walk in and, you know, imagine somebody who's got a lot of money versus somebody who doesn't, let's say they're going to buy some shoes. They walk in and they go, well, $10, okay, that's all I can afford. Decision's done, they're out, moving on. Where the other person's going, oh, wow, you know, and they spend 3 hours looking at, what about this color, this size, you know, what about the bottom, you know, the grips, the you know, you look at those other things that what wealth or extra, whatever you want to call it, can bring. It can cause trouble. And so for us, we have a wealth of time, you know, because I think about this often, where you go 300 years ago. The other night I was leaving the house, and I had put on a load of laundry, and I had put on, I started the dishwasher, and I left, and I was like, man, this is great, that now I can go off and go do something else while all this is getting done, you know, automated, you know, in a way. But I thought, man, I'm so glad I didn't live 300 years ago, because that would have been my next, you know, 2 hours, just washing out there, scrubbing whatever that looked like, the clothes that I was just going to wear maybe for the next day. And so God, all these automated things has given us a lot of time, which then, again, with our time, we make choices of how we're going to spend it, just like money. And so we have to come back, and God says, yeah, what are you going to do now with this extra time that you have? And again, we'll give an answer. So let's see here. How do these, question 4, paragraph 3, how do these scriptures interact with the theory? He says, in theory, God owns everything. With the theory that the patient and all believers are in total service to God, Romans 14, explains Screwtape's perspective, question 4b there, about the daily situation and how he seeks to protect it with no argument in its defense. Let's just read one. Somebody want to read James 4, 13 through 17?
I'll do it.
Okay. The rest of those scriptures, Psalm 90, Psalm 39, all of them speak about that we are like vapors. We're like the breath. Time is something that God has created. God owns it all. But before we read the passage, what's his perspective about, again, this daily situation? Why is there no argument in its defense? He says there. Well, look, I'll read the rest of paragraph 3 here. He says, now if he thinks about his assumption, first line of the second page there, for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. This is the daily situation. When I speak of preserving this assumption in his mind, therefore, the last thing I mean you to do is to furnish him with arguments in its defense. There aren't any. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near it. Wrap a darkness about it, and in the center of that darkness, let his sense of ownership in time lie silent, uninspected, and operative. So what do you see here?
Don't you dare let people think. And what I love about, because I think everybody that's been alive for any amount of time can look back to a hard season where the Lord brought it straight, either it's financial wreckage or relational wreckage or health or something where he is like, you do not have any power over this. And it shifts our focus. We either get bitter and angry or we acknowledge his lordship over it. And that's what makes us think. That's the inspection. Is like,
Inspection.
just let his life be so smooth that he never has to question any of these things, that he never, it never shakes him up at all.
That's the key, is that he's saying, the other word is operative. That's what we were talking about, is that for us, every single day, we're used to having our own time. I mean, or deciding what we do with our own time. We get in a habit. We don't have to necessarily answer. Again, if you have a job, you got to clock in, clock out. That's fine. But once you clock out, it's like, hey, it's the weekend. I can do whatever I want. No one's dictating to me generally. There might be responsibilities. It could be family responsibilities or household responsibilities, honey-do list, whatever. So there is. But what happens is we get in this operation where we get up every day and we go, oh, okay, I can do whatever I want today. If I want to go here, I'll go here. I want to take a day off to hit the slopes or go running or whatever. No one's really dictating to me. And so it's that when we get into habits tend to define us and they tend to trick us. So here, he's saying he's been thinking that his time is his own for a long time. Let it operate. Let it lie silent. Don't bring any attention to it. Your job is to block any sort of light that would remind him that his time really is not his own. Let him stay in that mode. That really is purely negative here. And I think this is brilliant, because how often do we get stuck in our routine? And then, again, when our routine is interrupted, we get frustrated. That's what he's after here. Is it's been operating for so long, his time is his own, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and he had this planned, because he's used to planning his own time, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and is going to interrupt his time, and he gets angry, he gets irritated. What is James? It's probably the best one, 4:13 through 17.
Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow, we will go to this city and spend a year there carrying on business and make money. Why do you do not even know what will happen tomorrow? What is your life? You are just a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them.
So, what's the sin here? Boasting, arrogance. We're going to go here, we're going to go here. And so, it's interesting that, not that we should try to sound spiritual, but it's when I hear people say, well, if the Lord wills, I appreciate that. Because, we tend, should I really say that? We should say that every time, if we can. It's not a legalistic thing, but it's a reminder. Hey, Lord willing, we'll see you here or see you there. Because it does remind us to say. But what happens is that here's Screwtape. Yeah, let him say it, let him say it, let him say it. And then something interrupts us, and we still get frustrated. Because now that if the Lord wills becomes rote. And we really don't mean it. It's just become part of a vocabulary. So then when the Lord interrupts us, and God says, well, were you saying if the Lord wills, well, I will this. And then we forget that we're a vapor. And that ultimately it comes back to what we talked about, the moon and the sun being the chattels, he gets into it, but is control. What do we really, really, really have control over?
Nothing,
Not much.
Not much.
no.
And even the things that we think, I mean, I don't have control over my next breath in the long term. I could have an aneurysm and drop dead in a moment.
You know, I've learned recently that I should not impose my will over God's will. In the sense with, you know, asking for things to happen for people, you know, they should have this happen to them, they should be helped, they should be, you know, I should not do that because God's will is in there doing what He wants to do with these people. It's my control that I have to let go of.
Well, and what's the first thing that we pray for in the sense of the prayer that Jesus instructed His disciples to pray? Thy will be
Thy
done.
will be done.
Your will be done. Certainly not mine.
This is what my devotion is telling me about. I'm listening
In this,
Your will be done as it is in heaven.
in this whole verse in 17, it says, if you know the good you ought to do and don't do it, it's a sin for them. So, you know, we should have a
Right.
sensitive ear on where God's working and hopefully join Him.
Hopefully
wherever
join
it
us.
is.
That's Oswald Chambers, isn't it?
No, it's Henry Blackaby.
Oh, because
Yeah.
Oswald Chambers basically
Yeah,
said
yeah.
the same thing. That's where I got mine from.
And in reality, Scripture says it first, so, you know.
Well, yeah.
No matter all these other guys, we'll give
There's two things that the Lord's Prayer, you know, for the Lord, like we just said, for the Lord's will be done. If you start your day, Lord, with your will be done, you're less likely to get into your own thing.
The challenge is we have to mean it.
Yes.
No,
Every
I understand that.
It's easy.
Your
It's
heart,
easy to say. I say it, you know, I'll say it and be like, and then my day gets interrupted and the guy's like, hey, I thought we just had to talk about this.
Right.
Did you not mean
Yeah,
it?
lip service, yeah.
You know, and again, that's the nature of, and that's the reminder of rote.
Yeah, and I think on our emotions, we can obey our emotions. We should not obey our feelings, obey God.
Yeah.
That's
We
kind
should
of, because
master
he's gonna,
emotions,
he might, if we're following and he asks us to do something, I don't wanna do that. But he says to, I better do it. And it's not always fun. It isn't always something I wanna do.
Like,
Guaranteed.
Yeah. How often does God ask to do things that we don't want to do? It's quite often.
A lot, yeah.
That's the nature of the Christian experience. You know, no, you're not allowed to do that. No, I can't. No, God says, absolutely not. That's forbidden. So,
it's like listening to that person that just won't stop talking and hasn't got anything really to say because it's kind of SOS different day.
Do you know the phrase inshallah?
is what?
Inshallah. Have you heard that phrase? It's Arabic, and it means if God
Oh,
wills it.
inshallah,
okay.
yeah.
And it's become so trite and so common in their culture that everything that you ask them to do, doesn't matter what it is. You
God's
gotta be
will.
here at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Inshallah means if God wills it.
Yeah.
It's just absolve them of any responsibility to do anything.
Yeah,
They put it all on God.
because they can blame God.
Blame
God,
God.
I didn't feel led,
Right.
right? That's the typical reason. I wasn't led. Okay.
And it's a trite answer, but this goes to what you're saying.
Yep, it absolutely does. Yeah, I find it interesting too that when people aren't led to do what's clearly explicitly commanded in Scripture, it's like, I don't care how you feel. You don't feel led? Well, this says it. So that's where it doesn't matter how you feel. Now, in the gray areas, okay, those that are not explicit, yeah, then we're led in different ways. But if it's clear,
I have a friend from a different culture that she says, and I like it because it made me think of the rote and different things. And she says, if the Lord says the same, so she'll say, I'm planning to do this if the Lord says the same.
oh, if the Lord says the same, yeah.
And I like that because it was same thing as God wills. If He wills, then I'll do this. But it made me notice it differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Because she says it differently. And I was like, oh, well, basically, if the Lord agrees with me in this is my plan. And if He doesn't, then that's not going to happen.
That's why it's always good, you know, sometimes to, you know, as you read through Scripture, there's one friend I have that she reads through the Bible in a year, every year, but she'll read a different version. Because it just says it, just a hair different. She's like, oh, I never caught the nuance, you know, of that. And it's really helpful to get outside of what our rote, you know, normal translations are. All right, let's go to paragraph 4 here. he says the sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership, which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. Much of the modern resistance to chastity comes from the men's belief that they own their bodies. Those vast and perilous estates, pulsating with the energy that made the worlds, in which they find themselves without their consent, and from which they are ejected at the pleasure of another. What's he saying there? This brings up a lot of things, but what's considered funny? Like I have that in question 5, Psalm 24:1. You know, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof.
You're at the mercy of somebody else.
They're at the mercy. Not only, I'm going to put this in the answers because there was an article that came out 3 weeks ago. I'm going to make myself a note here because I want to reference this. There was this guy who was his parents immigrated here from India, so he was 24 in school, and he's suing his parents for bringing him into existence, and he didn't ask.
Oh,
He said, I'm suing them for damages, so because I didn't ask to be born, and his parents were wealthy, he says, I'm suing in order for them to give me all the things that I need, because if they're going to forcibly create me, then they need to provide for me for the rest of my existence. Therefore, that's on them, that's not on me. And I thought, this is where we're at. This is where we're at.
That makes complete sense, because that's how we
It does
live.
make complete sense,
We
doesn't it?
live that way every single day. And one of the pastors I love listening to, he says, did you get yourself born? And do you get to choose when you die? No. And so, but we live like we do. We live every single day like we have a choice in it.
Yep.
And so that makes complete sense for the way that we live every single day.
Yep.
Of course we would.
For that young, entitled mentality,
Absolutely.
that millennial, we don't want to indict all of them.
I think
But,
that's the height of entitlement.
Sure.
I mean,
But again,
you can't
I
get
think
any
his
more
logic
than
is really sound.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
I think, wow, if you start with those parameters, and this is your foundation for your belief, then logically that's how many of us, again, when we stand back and we in the church or in theology, you see all these variations. And I sometimes I get amused at the battle between the Arminians and the Calvinists and those that believe in the sovereignty of God and the free will. And I sit here and I watch, and my son-in-law, just recently, so we were talking, and he's growing, right? And he's trying to figure all this stuff out because he's a young man, and he's like, wait, no, I hear all this, and he says, I think it's just wrong for anybody to say that God forces us to do anything. And I said, well, let's run with that for a minute. And then we talked about, hey, does God ever ask or require you to do something that you don't want to do? Could be loving somebody that's a jerk. Jesus says, love all, and love your enemies. That's pretty serious. That doesn't go along with my emotions. I don't want to do that, but God is demanding that I do that. That's just one example. There's a lot of commands that do that. I said, secondly, I go, this idea that God is sovereign. And he says, well, yeah, well, I mean, free will is what I see. And I said, how impactful was your free will, and I went here, on deciding to be born? He goes, well, what do you mean? I go, well, did you and God have a conversation in heaven where you said, okay, Lord, I'm going to agree to this, and I'm going to allow you to send me down here and to become a baby? Did you agree to that? And he goes, well, no. And I said, did you agree, or did you request to have blonde hair? What about the color of your eyes? Yeah, you're 6'3", yeah, big whoop, whatever. So you got lucky on that one. I said, but for some of us others, we would have requested probably a little bit of different height. And I said, and also, on that regard, how did that agreement go to be born in America versus being born in Zimbabwe? to be born in a place that is relatively wealthy in the sense of our country, or opportunity, versus being born in Iraq, under Saddam Hussein. I said, you didn't decide any of that. Zero, right? He's like, that's true. And I said, so then what makes you resist the other idea of God's sovereignty in these other areas of salvation? Salvation is the Lord's. I go, so I'm sharing you this to say, don't be so quick to deny God's sovereignty in salvation, if that's true. You can't press too hard on them, right? It's got to be their own idea. And I said, but if you resist that, you're contradicting yourself, because you didn't weigh in with your free will on any of these other decisions either. And what he's saying here is he's mocking in that this modern resistance to chastity comes from the belief that they own their own bodies. So there's several things here. One is that, hey, and we hear this phrase, it's my body, I can do what I want. If I want to sleep with 20 women or 20 guys, that's my prerogative. It's mine. You also see that with the abortion movement, right? This is my body, I can do what I want with it. So it's this is, not that abortion has been around thousands of years. This isn't anything new. So he's mocking this idea of those vast and perilous estates pulsating with energy that made the worlds, but yet they're here without their consent, and they can be ejected at the pleasure of another at any time. Could be a car accident, could be murder, right? We don't control any of those things, and he's showing the hypocrisy of it. He says, it is as if a royal child, whom his father has placed for love's sake, in titular command of some great province, under the rule of wise counselors, should come to fancy, or I'd say to believe, that he really owns the cities, the forests, and the corn in the same way as he owns the bricks on the nursery floor. In reality, this little child, who is in command by name only of some great province, is a steward, doesn't own any of it, but yet he's come to convince himself. This is the assumption. He's come to convince himself. Paragraph 5, we produce this sense of, this is Screwtape, we produce this sense of ownership not only by pride, but also by confusion. The two things. We teach them not to notice the different senses of the possessive pronoun, the finely graded differences that run from my boots through my dog, my servant, my wife, my father, my master, and my country to my God. They can be taught to reduce all these senses, I would say nuances is probably all these nuances, to that of my boots, the my of ownership. Even in the nursery, a child can be taught to mean by my teddy bear, not the old imagined recipient of affection, to whom it stands in a special relation, for that is what the enemy will teach them to mean if we're not careful, but the bear that I can pull to pieces if I like. And at the other end of the scale, we have taught them to say my God in a sense not really very different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have a claim for my distinguished services and whom I exploit from the pulpit, the God I have done a corner in. Okay, so there's a lot there in that regard. But the teddy bear, instead of saying, hey, this is my teddy bear that is a reminder of the relationship that I have with the one that has gifted it to me. It's a stewardship. Now we come to say, well, I can do what I want with it. It's mine. If I want to rip the head off, I mean, imagine you giving say, hey, this is a gift to you, and they say, it's a gift of mine, it becomes mine, and then they go and they tear it apart. As a parent, we're going to go, you ungrateful little, you ungrateful little snot, whatever, and we're going to take it back. Because even though we give them to them, we recognize that in reality it's a stewardship. But again, it goes to the nth degree. So I like what he says here. I think I have a question on this. Question 6b. Can anyone truly have a claim for my distinguished services? He says here, my God, in a sense, not really different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have a claim for my distinguished services and whom I exploit, the God I have done a corner in. What does he mean by done a corner? That's kind of, we don't really use that
I don't
language.
understand that, what I've done a corner in.
Yeah. What does that mean?
That you think that God owes you, basically.
Right.
That's
That,
kind of,
I got God in the corner now because I've been working so
Oh,
hard
he's in my
that he
corner.
owes me.
Oh,
But I want to read Luke 17. This is such a unique passage. Who's got this? Jen, you got this? Luke 17, 7 through 10.
And worthy servants. Will any one of you who is
This is Jesus speaking. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt. This
No,
is
that's
Jesus
fine.
speaking. Okay, go
Will
ahead.
any one of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him, when he is come in from the field, come at once and recline at table? Will he not rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you will eat and drink? Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? So you also will have done all that you were commanded. Say, you are unworthy servants. We have only done what is our duty.
So this is the image here is pretty sharp. It's Jesus is saying, and probably it's a little bit better. If anybody has a slave, he's out working, and he comes in. It's kind of like the prison analogy. Is you don't come in and say, "Hey, don't come sit down, have a bite to eat." Even if you did, this is the danger. God invites us to come in and sit down and have a bite to eat. And we look at them and we go, oh man, our master is really gracious. But what it does is it causes us to slap him on the back. Jesus is my homeboy. Right? He's my friend. And what Jesus is saying here, and it's interesting, I looked and looked and looked to try to find another verse that is comparable to this image. And I couldn't find any. It's actually searched for a long time. But he says, don't mistake the grace that I give you by walking in and telling you to sit down as if these lines of demarcation are gone. He says,
put me on the same level as
he says, you know what? And he says here, which of you, when he comes in, tells him to sit down? He don't. You tell him, hey, make my dinner. And then serve me, because I'm the master. And then when I'm done, and you say, you know what, I'm done. You're released. You can go and do as you please for the rest of the evening. I don't need your services anymore. I don't need your basically your services. He doesn't say, hey, you know what, thank you. And because why?
only done his duty.
Yeah,
Lord, you don't need to thank me. This is what I owe you.
that wasn't duty.
He says, we still need to say, you know what? I'm still unprofitable. Even the little bit that I do for you, I'm still unprofitable in the full sense. Now that's the stark black and white reality. And Jesus is saying, don't ever forget that. If you forget that, you've missed it. But if I come, and what we see later in other passages, is Jesus actually says, come on in, and he tells a parable where the master, puts his clothes on and says, sit down, and he serves us.
Right. Or he washes our feet.
Well, and washes the feet. That's a different. But he gives where he says, I'm going to serve you. And so we come in and we go, did I hear you right? Yeah, I want you to come sit down. I'm gonna make you dinner tonight. Well, Lord, this is my job. I didn't say it wasn't. But I want you to sit down. But when he comes and serves us, we should never run the risk of confusing what is really right in that regard.
He's teaching us kind of 101 that we're supposed to serve first.
Say again?
Like, we're supposed to be a servant first.
Yeah.
In other words, giving. That's like teaching us to be a servant.
Well,
that
he
doesn't. In other words, in order to get to that second phase, you have to first learn to be a servant.
Yeah, I think Yes, there's no doubt. And oftentimes Jesus, who is the servant, he says, I'm doing this as an example, like washing the feet in John 13. I'm going to do this as an example so that you will recognize that, you know, to be exalted in God's kingdom, you need to humble yourself. That, you know, they were fighting over who were the greatest. And Jesus says, you want to be the greatest? Go low. You know, the way up in the God's kingdom is to go down. It's really opposite. And so, let's wrap this up here in verse 6.
One more thing
Go ahead.
just on that. I remember the time in my life when the Lord said, don't misinterpret my patience and kindness to you as permission or agreement.
Or endorsement, yeah.
And we do.
Yeah, we do all the time.
We do.
And we mistake God slow to anger as being, oh, he must not care. Or this must not offend him.
Or maybe he's not angry.
Or maybe he's not angry.
Oh, he was mad.
Right, yeah. But he's so gracious with us that, again, we turn it. And this is why you see this in Scripture where they'll say, oh, God's not looking, because if God was looking, he would have judged us already. Now, oftentimes I have asked God to be a lightning bolt in my life. More. Because that would help me. That would keep me.
Yeah.
That would keep me going, oh, all right, I got it.
Yeah.
You know, wow, there's no
Watch
confusion
what you
here.
pray for, though.
I agree. But I think God says, you know what, Mondo? If I bolted you every time, you wouldn't learn anything. You would become, you might learn about holiness, but you're not going to learn about grace, and you're not going to learn to do it yourself, because then we become a robot, mechanical. And God isn't that way. So let's wrap it up here. Paragraph 6. And all the time the joke is that the word mind in its fully possessive sense cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. Anything. In the long run, either our father or the enemy will say mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, Wormwood, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. So he's the creator. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. And in reality, I mean, we can play with that as well, that even Satan can never say anything is mine. All he can simply say is, well, they served me, not him.
Gained the world but lost their soul.
Yeah. And there's no doubt that anybody that's in hell was serving Satan and not God in that sense. But all souls are the Lord's no matter what. All right, well, let's pray, shall we? Father, we come and again, we thank you for a good reminder. These are so valuable principles in our life that all 24 hours of every single day are yours. Help us to take an evaluation of our life and to see the ways in which we aren't being maybe as good stewards of our time as we should be, or resources or gifts or whatever that is, that nothing is ours. And ultimately, may you inspire us that you do draw us out oftentimes. I would say very clearly that there is a reward waiting for those who honor you with the freedom that we have to do what we will with the time that we have. That we would use it more and more for your glory, that we would be good stewards, and that even on that day when the rewards are there, we recognize that they all belong to you, but yet they're still real. The rewards are there, and it doesn't bother you to have the rewards motivate us to greater levels of service. But also, help us to not get caught up into being irritated and irritable when things intrude in our life, that ultimately we owe it all to you. And may those opportunities, as we say, if the Lord wills, may they be entertained with the proper perspective that, hey, wow, okay, you interrupted, I'm glad to give it. I'm glad because it's yours to begin with anyways. And so we just pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.